Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be getting back into Sam Kieth's weird, wonderful, and oftentimes pretty confusing world with the Maxx number 7, or as it's called on the cover of this issue, Maxx vs. Pitt. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in March of 1994, we can see that the cover does in fact feature both Maxx and Pitt facing off against one another. However, we notice that Maxx is in his Outback/Pangean form, and that Pitt somehow manages to have even bigger feet than Maxx, which seems almost impossible. But if you look a little bit closer, you notice, oddly enough, that the two of them seem to be miniaturized and are standing on top of what appears to be a desk with a pencil and some paper clips and change and a little bottle that's leaking Sam Kieth's signature, which is a really cool way to sign this. I like that he puts in these little oddball touches like that. But there's a lot of confusing things going on with this cover, and that's because there's a lot of confusing things going on inside of this issue. Story, art, Sam Kieth. Swell dialogue, Bill Messner-Loebs. Finishes, Jim Sinclair. Lettering, Mike Heisler. Color, Steve Oliff and Ollie Optics. Logo, Chance Wolfe. Film output, Kel-O Graphics. The story begins in a coroner's office where we see one of the coroners starting to disrobe a man by the name of Tigo, who was found in an alleyway in a cardboard box. He's actually quite surprised at the fact that the man still has his clothes on, as usually they've already been stripped down by the time they get down to the coroner's office. However, as he removes the man's clothes, the man suddenly transforms into a black Iz. The medical examiner has absolutely no idea what to think of this. He's rather shocked and stunned, and he's trying to figure out exactly what is going on when suddenly the door behind him creaks open, and we see that another is slowly creeping into the room as it says Meep with its teeth showing, and it seems as though that this situation has just gotten really bad for this coroner. We're then teleported to the apartment of Julie Winters, where we see that Maxx is fast asleep in a chair in her living room, which is not a good thing for Julie, as she is trapped in the bathroom, as the bathroom door has become lodged shut once again, and she's unable to free herself. She calls out to Maxx for help, however, she's unable to wake him. We then see that Maxx has once again teleported into his dream world and also believes that Julie is there with him. He tells her that he has the strangest suspicion that he's forgotten something back at home, but she states that it's probably nothing. He then goes on to state that this is the Outback, and this is the place he's been telling her about for months, and that it is truly here. It does exist. She's standing right in it, and it's not just a product of his diseased mind, as she always seems to write it off as. However, Julie states, so what am I supposed to do? Get down on my hands and knees and beg for your forgiveness? And Maxx responds by stating, well, I mean, not in so many words and definitely not in that tone. And Julie responds by stating, well, good, because I'm in a bad mood. Now, there's two important things to note here. Number one is that Maxx very clearly refers to this as the Outback. That will be important later on in this issue. But number two, and also equally important, we notice that this is the first time we've seen Maxx and Julie depicted here in Max's Outback fantasy as their normal selves. Typically, Maxx only sees Julie as the Jungle Queen, and he only sees himself as the warrior version of himself with the big giant headdress and as a very worthy and astute and formidable force in this land. And now he's just seeing the two of them as they exist in the normal world. Getting back to the story, we see the two of them sit down, and Maxx notices that everything seems a lot smaller here than it used to, as he looks down and notices that the Susadons are just tiny little things. He explains to Julie that they have long legs and are really good at hopping. She holds one up and states, well, obviously, look at this thing. She then turns to Maxx and asks, well, what are those little thingies? Maxx turns around and notices that there's a group of Izzes that he's stepped upon and has squished as he holds up his foot and tries to peel them off. He tells her that these are white Izzes and that he's not certain why they're so small either, as they were much larger the last time he was here. However, before he can get further into this thought, Julie asks him, well, if we're not dreaming, is it possible that we could die here? And Maxx explains that yes, this is very possible. However, he doesn't believe they're in any danger, as they're clearly the largest things in this area. However, Julie looks over her shoulder and notices something that may contradict Max's statement as she taps him on the shoulder. We then see that the figure who caught Julie's attention is none other than Pitt, who has shown up in Max's dream world of the Outback for no obvious reason, as Maxx seems to be rather surprised by this himself. Pitt immediately exclaims, "Where is Timmy? He's my only friend and now he's gone, and I believe you took him," as he jumps through the air and starts his attack. He grabs one of Max's hands and says, "Give him back." And Maxx states, "Well, Julie's my only friend, and if you hurt her, I'll..." And then suddenly the two of them are interrupted when Julie just screams, "Hey," and the two of them stop what they're doing and look at her with dumbfounded looks on their faces. Julie then shouts at the two of them to knock it off, that this is supposed to be her chance to work through a bunch of cathartic crap, and that she doesn't need the two of them fighting each other and getting in the way of that, and that this isn't earning Maxx any points. She then points a finger into Pitt's chest and says, "Hey, mister, I'm too good to have nostrils. We don't have your Timmy. We don't want your Timmy." And then suddenly Maxx interrupts and states, "Uh-oh," as the two of them look over to see billions of Izzes stampeding toward them. And Maxx states that while the Izzes are roughly the size of ants, when there's that many of them, they could actually be a real threat, as it's possible for them to just smother the three of them. Julie tells them that they need to run towards that cliff and that she'll stay right here, but before she can even finish her sentence, the two of them are already making a beeline towards the cliff. Julie states, "Well, so much for chivalry, I suppose," as she turns and begins to walk in a direction opposite of the Izzes. She then starts to realize that she's being drawn in this direction for some reason, and that she doesn't know why, but she feels like it's important for her to keep going this way, as we see that the skyline is filled with the chung, chung, chung sound that Maxx often hears when he finds himself drifting off into his delusional dream world of the Outback. We also see that this strange creature is starting to stalk Julie through the grass and follow her as she makes her way towards an unforeseen force that just keeps drawing her towards itself. And this thing starts to mutter to itself in some sort of unknown language as it continues to stay low and out of sight, as Julie even turns around at one point, believing that she saw something, but then thinking that it's just her imagination. We don't know what the heck this thing is, but it doesn't seem to be up to anything good. We are then suddenly teleported to Elmer A. Craft High School, where Sarah has been instructed by her art teacher to take inventory of all of the art supplies. Sarah hates having to do this, and she doesn't particularly like her art teacher either, as she begins to begrudgingly count up boxes, when suddenly one of the pieces of clay in a bag states, "Hi, kiddo, how's it going?" She looks around, and the clay says, "Yeah, down here, I'm a magical piece of talking clay." Sarah is quite surprised by this as she looks around to make sure that no one's playing a joke on her, and the piece of clay says, "No, really, I am. In fact, I want to help you. All I need you to do is get me into the apartment of Julie Winters." Sarah then bends down and asks the clay, "How do you know about Julie? You seem to get around a lot for a piece of clay." And the clay responds by stating, "Well, yeah, for a piece of clay I do." Then Sarah asks, "Why on earth would I help you? Why would I betray Julie?" And the clay responds by stating, "Well, it's pretty important for a writer to know just how rotten they can be." At this point, Sarah is caught off guard as her eyes get wide and she simply states, "Get out of my head," as she runs out of the room. And the clay responds by stating, "Yeah, you'll be back, and then the two of us can play all sorts of fun games that I don't know." We're then teleported back to Julie's apartment building as we see what appears to be real life Pitt chasing after Timmy as Timmy starts to go up the stairs. Pitt screams out Timmy's name, but Timmy doesn't respond. We then see that in reality, this is not Timmy. This is an Iz dressed as Timmy, and it is luring Pitt towards a very specific room, this room, of course, being Julie Winter's apartment, as it uses a key to open the door and let itself in. Pitt follows, trying to figure out where Timmy's going and what he's doing, and when he enters, he notices that Timmy is gone, and Maxx is here. He wakes up Maxx and exclaims, "Hey you, where's Timmy?" But suddenly the two of them are shrunk down to a tiny size, and this is where the book starts to get extra weird, as this is all seemingly happening in the real world, but how does it then explain why Pitt was in the dream world? And also, what on earth was and is doing luring Pitt towards the apartment of Julie Winters? And what's going on with this piece of talking clay that's trying to get Sarah to sneak it into Julie's apartment? A lot of questions are being asked on these 2 pages, and so far we have no answers for any of it. We then see that Maxx, in his shrunken state, has actually transformed into the version of himself that we typically only see in his Outback delusions, where he has the headdress on and believes himself to be a powerful warrior. He looks down upon Pitt and states, "I realize that you are very strong and muscular, and the two of us must do battle to see who rules these lands, as we are clearly the 2 largest creatures here." However, Pitt looks behind him and states, "Guess again," as we see the has taken off its disguise and not shrunken at all, meaning that he is now much larger than the 2 of them and poses a grave threat to both of their existence. Pitt asks what exactly this creature is, and Maxx explains that it's an although normally they're white and small and they travel in large groups and live underground. At this point, Pitt cuts him off and says, "Will you shut up and run?" And Maxx tells him, yes, Maxx will run, and we'll lose him in the grasslands of my beloved Pangea, which is important because this is the first time we've ever heard Maxx refer to the Outback as Pangea. Normally, it's only Mr. Gone that we've ever heard call it this, and Maxx only referring to it as simply the Outback. So this is definitely new territory that we're in. Also, the fact that Maxx in his Outback/Pangean form is now existing in the real world of New York City is completely flipping the script on everything we've seen up until this point. Maxx and Pitt run along the top of the refrigerator as Maxx tells Pitt that they can evade him using the cliffs. As he jumps down and lands on top of the stove, the tries to follow, and Pitt tries to mount a counteroffensive as he jumps up and begins to punch the All during this time, Julie is still stuck inside of the bathroom as she calls out stating, "Maxx, I know you're still out there. I can hear you moving. Maxx, you better still be out there." Meanwhile, Sarah has retrieved the piece of clay and brought it with her to the overpass that she likes to hang out near. The clay asks her if she spends a lot of time in this place, but Sarah isn't exactly too talkative and says, "Look, just because I brought you here doesn't mean that I'm going to betray Julie Winters." The clay says, "Well, why does it have to be a betrayal? What makes you think I'm going to do something terrible? Maybe I just want to be Julie's friend." And Sarah immediately calls the clay out on this BS, and the clay says, "All right, I figured that wasn't going to fly. Look, I'm just going to level with you." At this point, Sarah starts to scratch her head and state, "Stop screwing with my brain." However, the clay continues to speak to her and states that everybody gets to a point where they reach the moment in their lives where they hit a breaking point. The clay then says, "Look at you, you're talking to a piece of clay." The clay then goes on to explain to Sarah that everyone has a spirit guide, and for most people it's an animal. It starts to search through her brain and tell her that her spirit animal is a powerful steed, that it can see it now breaking through the magnetic wall, as we see here happening in the middle of the page, that she's built around her soul that's made up of all of the negative and terrible things that people have said to her over the course of her life. The clay then exclaims to Sarah that it can lead her directly to her spirit animal, and that animal can teach her how to make her way through her life and tear down that wall. The clay then tells her at the very end, "So I can lead you right to that horse, Sarah. What do you want to do?" And Sarah finally concedes and states, "When do we go to Julie's apartment?" Also, you may notice that the horse that is being shown inside of Sarah's mind seems to bear a rather striking resemblance to the horse bust that exists in Julie's apartment. Back at Julie's apartment, we see that Maxx is attempting to hide under a loaf of bread that has gone stale, believing that it is the rotting carcass of an air whale. However, this does not work as the Iz chomps through the bread and Maxx and Pitt are once again forced to try and retreat. They grab onto an electrical cable and swing from one countertop to the other, launching themselves through the air into a sink full of dirty dishes and soapy water. As Maxx pulls himself out of the water, he exclaims that he's been revitalized by the bubbling waters of this spring. He then grabs a knife, which he believes is the blade of Jarnbar from a stone, which is actually just a knife block, turns and faces the Iz head on. He then tells the Iz that he does not wish to fight it and only wants to be its friend, and that there's nothing the Iz can do to provoke him. However, as the Iz lunges forward, he simply says, "Oh, to hell with this," and jumps into the air, plunging the knife blade directly into the top of the Iz's head. The Iz falls and Maxx tells it bad Iz. However, he doesn't turn around to realize that the Iz is definitely not dead as it rises up behind him. Maxx tries to explain to Pitt that the Iz pushed him too far, but Pitt, realizing that they're still in danger, simply tells Maxx to run as they both jump onto the back end of what appears to be a fork sticking out of a drawer and use it to springboard themselves across the kitchen. Pitt then tells Maxx, "It's been really interesting hanging out with you today." Pitt then tells Maxx, "I don't usually get to be the smartest guy in the room," as we see the two of them on a bookshelf in Julie's apartment, and the Iz shoot across the room right through the side of the bookshelf. Pitt then tells Maxx to watch as he makes all of their problems disappear. He then wedges himself between the bookshelf and the wall and pushes the bookshelf over top of the Iz and Maxx, smashing the both of them. He then calls to Maxx and asks, "Are you okay?" Maxx cuts himself out of the bookshelf using one of his claws and says, "Maxx fine," but then also says, "Is fine too," as we see the Iz burst up through the backside of the bookshelf. Maxx jumps onto a door handle to a closet and says that he's going to open this brass temple to unleash a flood of lava that will kill the Iz. And he then tells Pitt to not worry, he knows what he's doing. However, there's obviously no lava behind this door as it's simply a closet in Julie's apartment. However, there is a large collection of videotapes that fall out of the closet like an avalanche, burying Maxx, Pitt, and the Iz. At this point, Sarah makes her way inside of Julie's apartment, dragging the piece of clay along with her. As the clay asks, "Are you sure we're in the right place?" Sarah tells the clay to shut up and that she doesn't even know why she's doing this. She then says that while her life does kind of suck, at least it's kind of normal, and that once she gets rid of this piece of clay, it'll be sane as well. However, upon saying this, she turns around and sees the scene that's been unfolding in Julie's apartment as we notice miniaturized Pitt and Pangean Mask tying up the black Iz with a phone cord. Sarah, seeing this and not knowing what to make of it, decides to instead just back out of Julie's apartment slowly as the clay starts to ask, "Sarah, you've put me in the right place. I can hear that you're out there, but you've stopped talking. I'm inside, right? You've put me inside, haven't you, Sarah? Haven't you, Sarah?" As we see Sarah walking away from the apartment with her hands in her pockets. And this creates a whole nother slew of questions, as up until now, we've been under the impression that everything that's been going on has been happening in Max's mind. However, if that's the case, why was Sarah able to see it? Is Pitt really in the apartment? Is Maxx actually in his Pangean form in the real world? And exactly what has been going on this entire time if Sarah's able to see the things that we all thought were just happening in Max's head? Meanwhile, to make things even more confusing, we see that Julie has finally reached the thing that was drawing her through the entirety of Pangea, and it is in fact the castle of the Jungle Queen. However, Julie remembers this structure, as it was something that she made as a little girl out of clay and popsicle sticks. We then see on the backside of the structure is Mr. Gone, but not as we've seen him before, not as a sorcerer, but as more of a tribal form of himself, as he realizes and thinks to himself that Julie is starting to remember, but it's happening too soon. And if she remembers now and they're all drawn back to the real world, he'll most likely go back to a body without a head, and that he can't let this happen as it will spell his certain doom. He then realizes that in order to prevent this, he must use his blowgun to shoot a poison dart into the creature that has been stalking Julie this entire time. Now, this again brings up more questions. Is this world happening simultaneously along with the real world? And if so, how is Mr. Gone's body and mind able to exist in two places at the same time, as he realizes that he has to exist in this world to prevent himself from dying? But if that's the case, how is his body in the other world maintaining itself? And what exactly is all of this got to do with Julie and her memories? There's a lot of questions again, and no answers in sight. Julie then leans down looking at the structure and says, "Yeah, I remember. I was the Jungle Queen. I was the ruler of my domain, and I would fight evil whenever it would appear. It's just like I remember." And then we see the tiny Mr. Gone stating, "No, no, no," as the creature which has been stalking Julie gets ever closer. She then remembers that she had a pet rabbit, but it died. And then Mr. Gone thinks to himself, "It's now or never, I have to do this," as the creature which has been stalking Julie slowly rises up to its feet holding a club. It rears back and prepares to strike her with its weapon as it lets out some sort of a cry, but again, it's written in a language that's just gibberish to us. Meanwhile, back at the cliff where Julie left Pitt and Maxx, Pitt has made his way up to the top. However, Maxx is struggling to get his footing and is asking Pitt to help him up. However, Pitt is in a trance as he looks down at the sea of Izzes and in his mind only seems to process them as Timmys. However, all of these Timmys have no eyes, and this doesn't sit well with Pitt. However, Maxx sees them for what they are and is desperately trying to get Pitt to help him up the cliff as he states, "Stop standing there just saying Timmy." Again, this is not the Pangean Maxx, this is the New York City Maxx, aka the real world Maxx. And he is not nearly as adept at living in this world as Pangean Maxx seems to be. However, Pitt is starting to crack up a little bit at this point as we see him snarl and state simply "kill," as we see that this story is going to be concluded in the next issue. We then get 2 advertisements for some fantastic products that I am 30 plus years too late to buy. One of which being the Maxx ash cans for issues 1, 2, and 3. I have never come across any of these in my digging through dollar boxes. I have come across some ash cans of other Image titles, but none specifically of the Maxx. Each one of these comes in several different colors. If I remember correctly, Sam Keith did explain that the black covers are the most difficult to find. We see here that the blue ash can, though, for some reason was was $15. I don't know why that was, but I want these so bad. It is such a dream of mine to come across literally any of these at this point, but I'd love to get them all. Unfortunately, given the fact that all of them were limited to 5,000 copies, it seems rather unlikely that I'm going to be able to acquire all of them anytime soon. We then get an advertisement for some Maxx apparel, these awesome t-shirts from Graffiti that I wish I had. I do have a Maxx t-shirt, but it's not as cool as either of the ones that are shown here, and I would love to be able to get my hands on some more Maxx apparel in the future. We then get to the Maxx tracks where readers could submit their letters and potentially have them printed and answered by Sam Keith. Also, Sam usually prints up some of the readers' original artwork that we see right here, here, and here. There were a few interesting letters in this month's issue, notably one letter coming from a reader who's very confused about the story and doesn't really understand where things are going. And Sam does admit to this reader that the story has been pretty confusing up until this point, and I find it refreshing that he's willing to admit that because, to be fair, the Maxx is a difficult story to follow in some places, and a lot of it doesn't seem to make sense until way later in the story, and even then, not everything makes sense in the end, so it was nice to see that Sam at least was willing to acknowledge this to readers. As we look at the third and fourth pages of the Maxx tracks, we see some more reader-submitted artwork here, and here. I do like this creepy Mr. Gone crawling around, and also the Beavis and Butthead reference is that are here in the bottom corner. Sam goes on to talk about in one response how he does worry that perhaps his story is not that good, given how confused many of the readers seem to be. However, he's already committed to exactly how he wants this story to go, and he believes that if he continues on the path that he's already started, it will eventually make sense to readers as long as they stick with it. And then the last letter that I found to be rather interesting is one where a reader states that they believe that Maxx is in fact Julie's spirit animal, and Sam concedes that this is actually really, really close to what is in fact the truth of it. It's not exactly that, but it's really close, which is very mysterious at this point in the story. We then get an advertisement for Pit number 4. If you'd like to check out my video on Pit issue number 4, as well as all of my other Pit videos, you can find them in my Pit playlist. There's then an advertisement for Supreme number 11. Now, I have not gotten anywhere close to issue number 11 of Supreme, but if you'd like to check out the videos of Supreme that I have made so far, you can find them in my Supreme playlist. We then see an ad for the Savage Dragon versus Super Patriot coming in Savage Dragon number 9. Now, as of recording this video, I have not reached issue number 9 of Savage Dragon. However, I will be doing that in the future, and if you'd like to check out the videos of Savage Dragon that I have made so far, you can find them in my Savage Dragon playlist. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for the Violator miniseries. If you'd like to check out all 3 videos on all 3 issues of the Violator miniseries that I've made, you can find them in my Spawn miniseries playlist. And that was the Maxx number 7, and it is a super weird issue of the Maxx. It's an odd read. As much as I enjoy the Maxx, I can admit that when this issue was originally published, if all you had read was the previous 6 issues, this issue doesn't make sense in almost any way. So much of what's being talked about in this issue, the things that we're learning, the things that we're discovering, they don't get explained until way later into the story. So when you take it into consideration, the microcosm of the Maxx story that we have so far, this issue feels so out of place. And I can understand why so many readers were writing in to talk about how confusing they found the story and feeling like they were lost in trying to figure out what was going on, as it seemed as though so much of it was just complete mystery to them. And it's understandable why. So much of it is. As I stated, a lot of these story points take a long time to pan out. And while most of them pan out really well and it's a gratifying reveal, at this point, it just feels completely discombobulated and as if Sam Keith has no idea where he's taking the story. He does, but it doesn't seem like it right now. Then again, these are just my opinions. You might actually believe this makes perfect sense and think that this is super well written and that nothing about the story so far seems confusing in any way. And if that's the case, it's okay because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.